On Zion's glorious summit stood a numerous host, redeemed by blood. They hymned their King in strains divine. I heard the song and strove to join. I heard the song and strove to join. Sing amen.
Is the Lord's church growing where you attend? Hello, my name is Cliff Goodwin, and I welcome you here today for Searching the Scriptures. If you're tuned in and you are a member of the Lord's church, then that is indeed a pertinent question. If you're tuned in with us and you're not a member of the Lord's church, we're delighted to have you along here today. And maybe as we study concerning church growth, there will be some spiritual principles that we bring up that will find helpful and beneficial application in your life as well. We've entitled today's study, Contributing to Church Growth. And for those of us who are children of God, church growth should be a matter of interest and perhaps even at times a matter of concern. We should care about the condition of the Lord's spiritual body, the church. We should be interested in advancing the cause of Christ and expanding the borders of His kingdom in our communities and throughout our world. What I want us to do today is I want us to take the Bible, the official book on church growth, if you will, the original book as well, and I want us to turn to God's Word, allowing God to speak to us through His Word, instructing us as to how the church of our Lord may and can and will grow if we do our part as her members. So let's take our Bibles and let's open them together to the book of Ephesians. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 4, and there's primarily a paragraph we're going to use as our text, verses 7 through 16. So find Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 7. And as you're turning there, I could say that there are volumes upon volumes. Book after book has been written on the matter of church growth. And yet it should also be obvious to all of us who believe in the God of the Word and believe in the Word of God that the Bible has the answers. It is all sufficient to meet our spiritual needs, as we see in 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 and 17. And so I submit to you that from this text, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 through 16, we can identify 3 or 4 key factors that will be absolutely essential to a congregation's growing according to the will of God. Read verse 7 with me as we begin. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. If you write or highlight in your Bible at home, I want you to highlight or underline the words, unto every one of us. That's important. As this paragraph begins and as this section of the epistle begins, there's going to be an emphasis on individual responsibility. The paragraph begins with that emphasis in the words, unto every one of us. Not unto some of us, not unto particular ones of us, not even unto most of us, but the Bible says unto every one of us. The grace of God has been given, so to speak. Now move down to verse 16, the last verse of this paragraph, Ephesians 4:16, and you'll notice midway through that verse the phrase, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part. Again, if you underline or highlight in your Bible, make a note of those words there, every part. I think this is significant. This paragraph begins in verse 7, it concludes in verse 16, and at both beginning and ending, there is an emphasis on individual responsibility. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us, friends, that our knee-jerk reaction should not necessarily be, Well, it's the preacher's fault that the church is not growing. Or it's the elder's fault that the church is not growing. Or it's his fault or her fault or their fault. Now, I understand that there are certain scenarios and circumstances in which particular persons or bodies of persons may bear great responsibility as to why the work of a church is being hindered and thus the church is not growing. I understand that. But in the overall scheme of things, speaking very generally, we see also that if a church is to grow, there is individual responsibility. Preacher needs to do his part, the elders need to do their part, but every member, every deacon, every teacher, every song leader, every widow, every person needs to do his or her part in contributing to church growth. Let's delve now further into this text and let's identify these 3 or 4 key factors to which every one of us must be attentive. Number 1, I want you to move down with me to verse 15 near the end of this paragraph, and the first key factor is simply truth. If a church is going to grow according to the will of God, she has to be permeated through and through with the truth of God's Word. Notice this from verse 15. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into Him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Notice that there is no growing unless there is the speaking the truth in love. Now this is an interesting consideration or observation rather regarding that construction. The King James Version simply says speaking the truth in love, but many Greek scholars have pointed out that literally it could be translated truthing in love. The idea behind this Greek phraseology is not limited to merely speaking the truth. Now that's absolutely essential, but it goes further than just that. It denotes an overall manner of life that is devoted to truth, that honors truth, and that is characterized by truth. And so verse 15 could really begin, but truthing in love may grow up into Him who is the head, even Christ. I've made the notes that the idea of truthing in love involves not only speaking the truth, but also holding or keeping the truth, and also following or living out truth in one's life. Now we don't have to guess, we're not left in the dark as to what truth is. Do you remember the words of Pilate in John chapter 18 and verse 38? When he asked in what seems to have been a disillusioned attitude, he said, "What is truth?" Well, if you and I ask that question today, the Bible has the answer. In John 17 and verse 17, Jesus was praying when He said, "Sanctify them," the apostles there, "sanctify them through Thy truth." Here it is. Thy word is truth. What is truth? Friends, it is the Word of God. God's Word is absolute, knowable, spiritual, unchangeable truth. And so now we see from Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15 that in order for a congregation to grow, that truth has got to be held. It's got to be followed, and it's got to be spoken. We need to be truthing in love. Back up with me in the text now to verses 11 and 12. Ephesians 4, 11 and 12, and notice what is said here. And He gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. Those last two are likely joined. Pastor, teachers, in other words. Why? For the perfecting of the saints, the maturing, the growing of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. Is that not what we're striving toward? Is this not church growth in its truest sense? if the saints are being perfected or grown into maturity, if the ministry is being worked and carried out, and if the body of Christ as a whole is being edified, that is church growth. That is what makes even for numerical growth. Well, notice that in verse 11, all of those offices that were present in the miraculous age of the first century, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastor teachers, the elders, all of them were given so that those items in verse 12 could occur, so that the saints could be perfected, so that the work of the ministry could be carried out, and so that the body of Christ could be edified.
Instagram. Now, Instagram. Andrew F. from your contacts is on Instagram as Phelps_8.
Is because the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastor teachers or the elders, they all taught and propagated the truth. If I may be so blunt as to say, sadly, one reason why too many congregations of the Lord's church are not growing according to the will of God, it is simply because they are not being fed a regular, steady, faithful diet of God's Word. Too many philosophies, too many theories, too many fads are being preached in too many pulpits today, and in order for true growth to occur, we need truth. Now, I know that with the philosophies and the pop psychology and the theological fads, I know that we can preach and teach those things, and our numbers might increase. But friends, in actuality, that's not growth. That's swelling. Just like when there is corruption in the physical body, you have swelling to occur. Well, likewise, when there is the corruption of doctrine in a local congregation, you often see it accompanied by swelling in numbers. That's because sinners from the world can flock to the fellowship of those people and not feel convicted of their sins, not be reminded of their guilt, not be urged and pressed and encouraged to reform their lives. That's not growth. That's mere corruption. And our congregations, in order to grow with the increase that God provides, we need truth. We need the truth of God's Word. God, give us more pulpits where book, chapter, and verse preaching is promulgated, is preached, spread for the audiences to hear. But now let's go back to our text. Ephesians chapter 4, we've identified truth in verse 15. What's our next key factor? Something absolutely essential to a church's growth. Well, friends, also from verse 15, that's going to be love. Notice back down there, but speaking the truth in love, or truthing in love, we may grow. You know, if a congregation does not have a prevailing atmosphere of love, charity one toward another, then that congregation will never grow as it ought and as it can. Love has got to be there. Any visitor who comes from the community roundabout, they don't have to visit very long to detect that love is not present as it ought to be. Oh, love is evidenced in the way that we treat one another, our relationships, and especially the way that we speak to one another. It's evident in the consideration that we show one for another. We have got to have love. In John chapter 13 and verse 35, Jesus said here simply, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have love one for another." If we want a visitor from the community to be able to recognize, hey, we are the true church, we are practicing simple New Testament Christianity, well, when they're around us anytime at all as brethren, they need to be able to see the love that we have one for another. By way of contrast, a congregation where there's bitterness, backbiting, belittling one of another, that visitor and all other visitors soon will see that something's amiss. Something's awry with this church, and in all likelihood, they will not want anything to do with it whatsoever. we need love. In Matthew chapter 22, a lawyer came to Jesus and he was asking Jesus really one question. Jesus answered not only that one, but he also went on to answer another question. The question was first asked, what is the first and the great commandment? And of course, Jesus gave the answer, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, thy soul, and thy mind. But then Jesus went on to say in verse 39, and the second commandment is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now I've chosen these two supporting verses, John 13:35 and Matthew 22:39, because now what I want us to do is I want us to see that not only must the love for ourselves or for one another as brethren be evident, but also we've got to show and demonstrate love for our fellow man in general, sinner as well as saint, the lost as well as the saved. If we genuinely love the souls of men, we're going to go out to those people like the Great Commission requires. Go ye. We're going to go to them instead of waiting idly for them to come to us. When we go to them, we're going to go with the truth that can save their very souls. John 8 and verse 32, James 1 and verse 21. But as we present and share that truth with them, we're going to be mindful and we're going to be careful to do so in as sensitive and as tactful a way possible. We don't want to shut doors before they ever have the chance to be open. We don't want to turn people off in such a fashion that their hearts may possibly never be receptive to the truth of the one church, the one way of salvation, John 14 and verse 6. Friends, it takes love. It takes caring, understanding, sensitivity, as we've already mentioned. It takes a great deal of tact. And there's really a degree of skill, I suppose, that's employed in knowing exactly what to say, but also knowing how to say it. We all need to be praying and asking God for wisdom. James chapter 1 and verse 5, wisdom in how to better do this, to convey not only the truth, but to convey the proper love in our hearts toward our fellow man. What does a church need in order to grow? It needs both of those things. It needs the truth of God's Word, and it needs the love of God. The love of God in our hearts toward each other, and the love of God in our hearts toward our fellow man. But now number 3. We go back to Ephesians chapter 4. We're going to look again at verse 12, which we've already read at least once. But there's a third component, a third factor, without which the local congregation is not going to grow as she can, as she ought to be growing. And that is, number 3, work. Now, to too many people, we know work is a 4-letter word, right? Too many people don't want to hear about work, and especially they don't want to hear about work in regard to the church. I mean, after all, they work 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks at their place of employment. And then beyond that, they have their hobbies and their pastimes and their leisure activities. And so really, they just want church to be that safety net that is there. They'll give us the token visit on Sunday mornings, and they'll come and fill a pew, and by all means, take the Lord's Supper. They'll do that. But they don't want to be told that there's work to do beyond coming in and punching a ticket and filling a pew. Friends, there is. You know, in too many of our members' lives, if I may put it bluntly once again, in too many of our members' lives, church is just a side attraction. It's just something on the back burner, and we're non-committal. We don't want to go the extra mile. We don't really want to get involved beyond showing up on Sunday mornings. And we don't want to have to exert of our energies and give of our time in order to do things through the week. Well, in congregations where that attitude prevails among the members, it should come as no surprise whatsoever that such a congregation is not growing. Notice in verse 12, he says, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work, the W-O-R-K, the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. There is so much work to be done, and all of us should be actively involved in furthering the cause of Christ. I think about 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58. You may want to find it with me in your Bible at home. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Someone might ask, well, preacher, how can you be so quick to criticize or even condemn the attitude where a person only wants to do what is required? After all, isn't that what is required? And so as long as you do that bare minimum, you should be okay. Well, no. That attitude is the polar opposite of the one that we see here in 1 Corinthians 15:58. On one hand, the person has a minimalistic attitude. What's the bare minimum that I can perform out of a sense of duty and be all right? But that has never been the spirit of Christianity. That's never really been the desire of God. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding. That word means to overflow in excess, to be plentiful, to be copious. In other words, our attitude should not be minimalistic, but rather we should seek to maximize our efforts. We should seek to do all that we can do in the kingdom of Christ. Friends, is that really not worthy? Is the church not worthy of that kind of devotion? If there really is a heaven to gain, there really is a hell to shun, and there really is an eternity looming before us all, is the cause of Christ not worthy of our having the attitude, what more can I do? I want to do all that I can do in the work of the church. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, the Bible there tells us, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. God knows how we are as people. He knows that we are prone to getting tired, and that's natural in the flesh for us to become tired. But spiritually, He cautions us, don't grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. There's work to do. As we sometimes sing, there is much to do, there is work on every hand. Do you want your local congregation to grow? Well, then every one of us as members, we need to be actively involved in the work of the church. We've discussed 3 important factors thus far. Contributing to church growth means, number 1, there must be truth. Number 2, there must be love. Number 3, there must be work. But we could add a 4th component, a 4th consideration to this study. And that is, in the 4th place, there must be giving. Now, when we use the word giving here, we mean giving in an overall sense. Often we hear that term and we think about our money. And there's something that needs to be said about that. In order for churches to grow and to expand and to further their works, they have to have the financial resources to carry those things out. Absolutely. But we're going to not only include money in this discussion, we're going to broaden out the usage of the word giving, and we're going to talk about giving of our time, giving of our money, giving of ourselves, our very abilities, our very talents that we can employ and enlist in the service of the Lord. I want you to notice right here with me verses 7 and 8. Let's go back to verse 7, the beginning of this paragraph. But unto every one of us...
News break. Now, breaking news. Ukraine and Russia signed UN-backed deal to restart grain exports.
Now,
Attachment.
in this first century context, probably the idea here was of miraculous capability. The first century church during the apostolic era, the members were often endowed miraculously with certain spiritual gifts. And in all likelihood, in the context here, that's the idea. Verse 8, it says, Wherefore he saith, When he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive, and gave gifts unto men. Probably in this context, miraculous gifts. But now there's a principle that's at work here. And the principle is whatever God has given us, whatever the Lord has bestowed upon us, we ought to be using it. We ought to be employing it in the work and in the furtherance of the church. That's giving. We ought to be giving of our abilities, our talents. Now, today none of us are endowed miraculously, but all of us are blessed by natural means and in natural ways with any number of talents. The question then arises, are we giving of ourselves to the work of the church? There are some verses here that we need to consider along these lines. Consider with me, first of all, Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 3. Here the Bible says, For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office or the same function, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members one of another. See, God is not necessarily asking you to do what brother so-and-so does, or asking you to do what sister so-and-so contributes. But God is requiring that you do what you can do, exercising and using the talents with which you have been blessed by God Himself. You know, that applies to our talents and our abilities. It applies to the resources at our disposal, the monies and the possessions that we've been so richly blessed with, that in turn, as good stewards, we ought to turn around and employ in furthering the cause of Christ. And through it all, it involves our time. Every day to which we awaken, we are given the opportunity to live and to work and to give of ourselves, our talents and our resources to further the cause of Christ. Are we giving? Are we doing what we should be doing in order to help the church grow? Thank you so much for studying these matters with me. Make plans to visit with the Church of Christ in your community, even this Lord's Day.
Glorious summit stood, a numerous host redeemed by blood. They hymn their King.
It's 10 o'clock.
This is WJHF LP, Florence, Alabama, 106.9 FM. Brought to you by the Jackson Heights Church of Christ.
It's 83 degrees.
You know, we're all familiar with the terms traditional family. We think about a mom and dad, perhaps 2 or 3 kids living in the home. Of course, many of the programs from days gone by that we watched on television, programs such as Leave It to Beaver or other programs, the Cosby Show, these other programs that have come out down through the years have tried to present family.
YouTube TV, Now, Live, ABC News Live. Watch now on ABC News Live. Attachment.
Living in that home. But we know that that kind of home is not representative of every home, and sometimes there may be a situation in which the traditional family is not all that traditional. By that, what I'm talking about specifically is that you may find a situation in which you have a father in the home, but there is no mother in the home, or vice versa. The mother is in the home, but the father is not in the picture. And so we want to deal with that particular scenario that is very real in the lives of so many people.
YouTube TV, now,
Watching
live,
the program
before
today,
focus, watch now on Fox
this
News,
describes
attachment.
your family. And we're talking about specifically challenges that face the single parent family. And I have with me as my guest today, Brother Gary McDade. Brother Gary, it's good to have you with us. You've been on other programs in the past, and you've always done a wonderful job. And Gary works with the Gospel Broadcasting Network, and we're thankful for your participation.
Thank you, Barry. It's great to be here.
And we also have with us Tommy Leslie. Tommy is someone who has helped us in times past on this program, and he assists the Gospel Broadcasting Network in various ways and means on a weekly basis, and we're glad to have him sitting in and talking about this important subject as well. Well, as I said in the introduction, there are a number of families that are not what we might describe as the traditional family with two parents and children living in the home. Unfortunately, we live in a world where sin has ravaged the home, and sometimes there may be a situation in which sin has entered into a home to such a degree that one of the spouses in the marital relationship is no longer in the picture. Or it could be something even as tragic as death has come. And so you may have a mother and not a father, or a father and not a mother in the family unit. And so those can certainly pose some great challenges that are not experienced even to the same degree as perhaps where you have both a mother and father in the home. So I'd like to get your input today as far as some of the challenges that a single parent home is going to face, and also what a person in that particular situation could do to deal with that challenge. How can we successfully meet the challenge head on? I want to begin with Tommy Leslie and get your thoughts today, Tommy, concerning these challenges.
We know that in our world today, most people live on a high level of stress anyway, whether it's a single parent family or whether both parents are in the home. And there are situations that can cause even more stress than normal. And when we look at the single parent family, we see that the responsibilities in that family are greatly multiplied for that parent. And many of the parents are trying to learn, and not only learn how to deal with it, but how to do it right. Rather than just getting through it, there are those parents that want to do it right, and it's very difficult. And I would say the very first thing to do is put their trust in God and turn to God, look at His Word, learn what His Word says about the things that a person needs to do to have the proper faith in God. In Matthew 6:33, Jesus said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you." And of course, that He's talking about the necessities of life. And we know that that's the main thing. The extra things in life are great, but we're not promised those extra things. But as long as we're faithful to God, seek the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God first, then God's going to provide for us. But that's just the beginning. There are other things that are involved in that people need to do. And it's no one single thing, it's a combination.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, Tommy. You bring up an area here that can be a challenge to a single parent home, and that's finances. Gary, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, truly, when you have a single parent family, the single parent, with the expenses of the children as well as their own, is going to need to be dependent upon God and look to God in faith to provide the things that are necessary. And we're thankful that we have the promise Tommy brought out, seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. A lot of times the children are, of course, obviously closer to that parent because it's the only parent in the relationship. And when, as a single parent, you have the advantages of being the breadwinner, the person to look to for spiritual guidance and example. And you may sense that as a kind of pressure, but also you have a great opportunity to be an example to your children. Finances are tough because when you have a double portion usually being laid on that single parent, one of the things we can look to is the help of our parents to assist us in that regard. And in many instances, there are the parents who are stepping in to help with those raising of those children and assisting with finances, and that's very much appreciated there. Two, also the activities in which a person is engaged. You know, when we have the opportunity to provide social interaction for our children, that's something we want to do, but if we don't have money for them to be on the football team or to take them to the soccer field or whatever it is that the children are wanting to do, we're pressed for cash. Well, there are other things that we can do to provide them with healthy social interaction. I think of being at the services of the church every time the doors open and have our children in classes that are prepared by godly teachers who take a personal interest in those children. And then in that way, they may be able to assist when they see there is some need that as a parent I can't provide because I'm not making enough money. Maybe they could be able to befriend us enough to help in that regard. It's wonderful to have friends. I remember Marshall Keeble said, I'd rather have friends than money, especially if my friends have money. so there's that idea. When we're members of the church, we're members of the same body. We have an extended family. And I think that really is an opportunity and a privilege that many people in our society are overlooking because they don't see what the church is. And when you see the church from the light of the biblical perspective of it being the family of God, as Ephesians 3:15 says, then you have brothers and sisters that you can help to bear your burdens. The Bible teaches us, bear you one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And we're interested in doing that. When there's a mother who can't provide for her children like she needs to, we want to be able to help. When there's a father who, I knew a man, he's deceased now. He lost his wife and he had a boy and a girl, and he just gave his daughter to his sister to raise because he said, I didn't know anything about raising a girl. And so he gave the little girl to his sister to raise. And then he raised the boy. Well, those pressures are there. Well, we can assist like family would during times of duress.
And that's a good point to bring out how that we do need to rely upon our church family to help us during those difficult times. And there are various organizations that are run and operated by members of the church that can also be helpful during those times of stress. But certainly finances can weigh heavily upon a single parent. It can weigh upon a home in which there's both the mother and the father. Exactly. But you can imagine when there's just one, and that one is responsible for taking care of the household. You know, one thing I do want to mention here, want to touch on the fact that even though say a wife or a mother, I should say, here is a woman who is trying to raise these children on her own. The husband's no longer in the picture. There can be the temptation, at least, to think along this line, well, I just need to find somebody as quickly as I can to help me with this situation. And first and foremost, we want to say that before someone enters into a marriage, that person must be scripturally eligible to enter into a marriage, based upon the teachings of Matthew chapter 19, verse 9, and other passages as well. And that the person they're wanting to marry is a scriptural candidate for marriage based on that same passage. But let's say that both parties are eligible. But here's this mother, and she's thinking, you know, I need to go ahead and marry as quickly as I can because I need some help. Well, there's nothing wrong with wanting help, but at the same time, marriage is not something that needs to be entered in lightly. Am I correct in that?
You're correct. And it's an important decision because according to God's Word, we know that marriage is to last forever, and occasionally there are problems in a marriage, and we know that God's Word is binding. The only reason a person would be able to divorce a person and remarry is if their mate was unfaithful to them and committed adultery on them. but it goes deeper than that. We most certainly want to look at that, as one of the major points, but the person needs to also look ahead, not just to their needs, but the needs of their children. How is it going to affect their children? How is this person, how good or how bad would this person be for the family life? So there are a number of things that have to be considered, and the temptation is there, as you say. We just pray that people will take a step back and look at the whole picture rather than just part of it.
And that's a good point, because you bring up there about how that this person's going to have an influence on my children. And they may be a good person in many respects, but perhaps they're not as strong of a Christian as they should be. And they tend to let other things take priority in their life. Well, I need to remember as a mother or as a father, if we were talking about the opposite scenario, that this person that I'm going to marry is going to have an influence in my home. And I might be thinking, yeah, this is going to help take care of this financial problem. And that's true. It might help in that area. But there are other areas which it may or may not help with. And so we need to consider all of these matters.
You would want a person, if you were scripturally approved to marry this person, you'd want to make sure that person is compatible with your children, because they're going to be taking lead. If it's a woman and she's marrying a man, he's going to be the new head of the house. I know I served in the military in submarine service. I went on a submarine. I was on a submarine tender. I was always thankful for that. But a lot of the fellas, there was a 100-day cycle where you were on that submarine for 100 days, and then you would get to be back home. And in a lot of instances, even among members of the church, there was a challenge because of the disciplinary action being taken toward the children. The mother, when the father was gone, the mother would have a system in place. And then the father would come back and he'd be interjecting himself into that situation. Now here you have a strong couple. They're willing to undergo the extraordinary burdens of military life, and they want to live godly Christian lives. So every motive is pure, every action is to the design to accomplish God's will. But yet that circumstance right there serves as an illustration for us on the difficulty of interfacing another person into home life. And it's not something that's going to be automatic. And it would be really, really advisable for a person who is looking into a second marriage, who has a right to do that from the Bible, to make sure there is that compatibility and to talk about how do you discipline these children. What the women would say is they felt strange for the father. He's going to step right back in and tear the kids up. They need a spanking. Yeah. Well, she feels a little protective of them, and that would incite some difficulty there. Well, all of that needs to be worked through in order to have a good situation at home.
Well, let's think about another area that would be related to a single-parent home, and that is the spiritual development of children in that home. Let's take it out of the arena of a single-parent home in which the wife or husband, or I should say mother or father, is entertaining, marrying another person. But let's just focus just on someone who is in that home, the mother or the father. They want to raise their children up in the love and admonition of the Lord. Is it possible to do that in a single-parent home?
It's possible. It may be more challenging and harder, but yet it is possible. And there are a lot of factors that are involved. You have to look at maybe the past family situation, what they've been through. You have to look ahead to the goals. What does that parent want to accomplish spiritually? And to understand that the children and the parent themselves need to have that spirituality in their life. And it's possible, but it can't be done. I won't say it can't be done, but it'd be very difficult to be done alone. And that's why the church is so important. And members of the church need to oftentimes be a little more attentive to recognize some of these needs, because some people are not so comfortable coming out and explaining their situations, and therefore may not get the added help that they would need. But it's most definitely possible. But for a single parent, it's going to be even more challenging. But I would just encourage people to that are in that situation to, first of all, be faithful themselves. They set the proper example, and the children will learn from the parent, whether good or bad. And so the proper example should be set, and then also interaction with the congregation that they're attending to help them also be aware of the problem so they can help in that spiritual area.
Gary?
Well, you think about the need to train up a child in the way he should go, Proverbs 22 and verse 6. And then, of course, in Ephesians chapter 6, in verse 1, we have the rearing up of children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And the children are having the opportunity to see sacrifice, and it would be unusual sacrifice on the part of a single parent to be raising these children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And there's an added incentive for the children to be well behaved and to be more respectful to mom and to be even more mature out in society. You know, it can go either way, but you see children in society who are being raised by single parent mothers who are very conscientious. They're conscientious of when they need to be home. They're conscientious about how they need to behave when they're out because the mother's making that point to them, and they respect that because they realize that in that family there's an unusual circumstance and a lot of pressure that's being placed on their mom or their dad, and they love them and they want to respond in a way that's going to bring them honor.
Well, we've got just about a couple of minutes left in our program, so real quickly, I'd like to get your thoughts concerning, say, an older child who's in the home. Should a parent, single parent, rely upon an older child to kind of help take up some of the areas of need as far as parenting is concerned? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's a good idea, but it has to be done in the correct way. In other words, not to overburden the child to where the child feels like they're the parent, but yet incorporate the child into the activities of the family to where they know that they're helping out, but all the responsibility doesn't rely on them or fall on them. And it's a partnership.
Okay. Gary?
I always say I was raised in the home with 4 women, 3 older sisters and my mother. It's like you got 4 moms there. And I appreciate that because it's kept me out of the penitentiary. But they had no problem whatsoever in stepping into the parental role and telling me what I would be doing and what I would not be doing. And I appreciate that. They gave me a lot of good guidance.
And I think that's a good balanced answer that both of you have given, in that it's good if a child is older, they can begin to assume a little more responsibility. They can help in the home in that way, but at the same time, they still need to be a child, and they don't need to be the substitute parent, and a parent should not expect them to be. And so I think that would be the right approach. Well, you know, this is a subject that we've just really scratched the surface on. There's so many other things that we could discuss, and perhaps in a future program, we'll be able to get into this a little bit deeper and to talk about some other matters concerning a single parent home.
Yeah, I would hope that people could see the concern and love that we have for people in that situation. That's why we're talking about this, and we want to be helpful.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions that you would like to raise or comments concerning this particular program or any of the programming that you find on the Gospel Broadcasting Network, we encourage you to email us. The email address will be there on your screen, and you can, anytime you want, send an email to us or call us, and we'll be glad to help in any way that we can. I want to thank you again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Barry Gilreath Jr., wishing you a great day.
Let's make the most of a minute. In his book entitled The End of Man, John B. Whitehead makes a tragic statement regarding truth. He said, at the beginning of the 1920s, the belief began to circulate for the first time at a popular level that there were no longer any absolutes. The idea of no absolutes is simply that we cannot know or affirm that anything is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. The tragedy of this mind-poisoning theory is that it leaves men and women bewildered about how to please their God and how to relieve themselves of the guilt of their sins. Listen, the Bible is absolute truth. You can count on it. And it affirms in John 8 and verse 32 that we can know the truth.
Music record selected. Screen recording.
Will make us free.
Double tap and hold to show more controls.
Is absolute. I'm Glenn Colley from the Church of Christ, hoping you make the most of your minutes.